I'm going to talk about government funding of abortion, and I'm also going to end with a surprising thing that you can actually do to help stop or reduce the amount of government funding of abortion. Okay, first I'm going to give a little update, federal update, talk about President Obama's stand on abortion. President Obama, when he was still a state senator in Illinois, he voted no on the Born Alive Infants Protection Act of 2002, which would have protected infants who survive an abortion, and they would just leave them out until they died. And he's later tried to explain why he voted that way, but he nonetheless voted that way. I've got a quote up there from townhall.com where the writer said, Barack Obama is the most extreme pro-abortion candidate ever to seek the office of President of the United States. He is the most extreme pro-abortion member of the United States Senate. So President Obama is a very pro-abortion president. And in his run for president, he was endorsed by NARAL as well. And actually, that was a significant endorsement because it happened during the primary. So they thought so highly of him that they endorsed him over Hillary Clinton during the primary. And then Planned Parenthood waited till the end of the primary to endorse him. When he was in the Senate, the U.S. Senate, he voted for the Freedom of Choice Act, which would have effectively repealed the Hyde Amendment. And then in a 2007 speech to Planned Parenthood, while he was running, he said, the first thing I'll do as president is sign the Freedom of Choice Act. Fortunately, that didn't happen. So he and his allies have actually worked very hard to promote abortion, but they've had some key defeats. In 2009, President Obama said that the passage of the Freedom of Choice Act was not the highest legislative priority. So for now, that's a good thing. Not so good. As soon as he got in, he immediately overturned the ban on federal funding of international groups that do abortions, the Mexico City policy that President Reagan started. And he also lifted the ban on federal funding for new embryonic stem cell research. He tried to rescind President Bush's conscience rule, but he failed. And actually, I just learned recently that conscience rule actually made its way into Obamacare. So far, so good on that. And the lame duck Democrat Congress failed to repeal the military abortion ban, which is another good thing. So we've actually had a lot of success at the federal level, despite President Obama's push for more abortion and more abortion funding, and all of his allies' push. They've not been very successful at the federal level. Something they were successful at, and where they put most of their effort, was into federal health care reform. And the health care reform that became Obamacare was pushed heavily by a number of national pro-abortion groups, including Planned Parenthood, the National Abortion Federation, and many others. And when I say heavily, 6 months before it was even signed into law, the pro-health care reform group, all these different groups, had already spent $47 million advertising, trying to push for health care reform. Why would these groups be so interested in promoting health care reform? One of these national pro-abortion groups, the National Institute for Reproductive Health, is currently, this little box here, that's from their website this week. They're currently making grants to educate, research, and train advocates and elected officials on issues related to private insurance coverage of abortion. So one of the ways they're going to try and get more abortions is to force insurance companies to have to provide health insurance for abortions. And one of the ways I think they're going to be able to do that is through these exchanges. But so this organization here, this is from their website. The National Institute for Reproductive Health can play a critical role in the abortion funding conversation through research and message development that arms advocates, elected officials, policymakers, and activists with strong value-based messages, that's a sick use of that term, that ensure support for women's access to insurance coverage for abortion care. So this is one of the groups that was pushing so hard for Obamacare, one of the groups that helped spend up to $47 million 6 months before it even got signed into law. So these groups are very interested in getting government-run health care going. And why would they be for that? this is more on the Obamacare. Obamacare mandates that some healthcare insurance benefits be essential coverage for which there will be no copays. So that's a way for states and the federal government to mandate that insurance companies treat abortion as essential coverage. And if they don't do it today, they'll do it a year from now, 2 years from now, but they're laying that groundwork. The state exchanges established under Obamacare will certainly include plans that cover abortion. These plans will receive federal subsidies, thus violating Hyde principles. That's an article from the National Review Online. And the same writer concluded, in short, Obamacare marked a decisive pro-abortion shift. So we saw some good defeats of the efforts to promote more abortion, more government funding of abortion. One of the reasons we were able to do that is because they were all focused on passing Obamacare, which carries with it a lot of dangerous things as far as creating more abortions in America and more funding of our dollars. So people like us who are opposed to abortion end up having to pay for abortions through our tax dollars. Okay, now talk a little bit about Oregon and our Governor Kitzhaber and his stand on abortion. When he was the state Senate president, he was one of the chief authors of the Oregon Health Plan. And this was back in the early 90s. And the Oregon Health Plan currently pays for 1 in 3 abortions in Oregon. So every one of us who pays state taxes, we're currently paying for abortions. And this is downloaded. I downloaded this week. It's the Oregon Health Plan's Client Handbook, and it's online. If you just Google it, if you look on page 14, I made a picture of page 14. The following family planning and related services are available to men, women, and teens, and they define related services to include abortions. This is in the Oregon Health Plan's manual. And there's no copayment. So in Oregon, if you're on the Oregon Health Plan, you can get an abortion with no copayment. And all of us who pay taxes are paying for that. That's 1 in 3 abortions in Oregon. And I think I took a look at this once. If the state would recognize that abortion is a death, abortion would be state-funded abortion would be the number 3 cause of death in Oregon, behind cancer and heart attacks. State-funded abortions. Abortions in general would be the number 1. Okay, a little bit more on Governor Kitzhaber. In 1999, he vetoed the parental notification bill. In 2010, while he was running for governor, he was endorsed and very heavily financed by Planned Parenthood and NARAL. And during the 2010 campaign, he made a point many times of saying that he was for a woman's right to choose, and got very strong support from Planned Parenthood and NARAL on that message as well. Okay, and so, unfortunately, Oregon also has its own version of Obamacare. It was passed in the 2009 session, and it's House Bill 2009, and it's actually more aggressive than Obamacare. One of the pieces that it has that the national legislation doesn't have is it has a public option. So, it's a 536-page bill. And I actually tried to read through it once and I gave up. Every second line, it will refer to another piece of the law or another piece of legislation. It's just a nightmare. But they passed it. They passed it in 2009. And one of the things it did is it transferred healthcare-related authority from the Department of Human Services to a split-off of the Department of Human Services that they're calling the Oregon Health Authority. And they gave that authority, they asked this Oregon Health Authority to create an essential health benefits package, which, if it doesn't initially, it will eventually include abortion. And that would be a way for the state of Oregon to move from paying from 1 in 3 abortions to 3 in 3 abortions. And they set the policy goal of every Oregonian having health care by 2015. So, and I don't know how soon all of this will happen, but they're doing 2 things. They're controlling health insurance companies more and more and directing what kinds of services they have to cover, which that was the slide earlier, that group that's going around training up people how to move the public discourse so that people think it's a good idea to force health insurance companies to provide abortions. And then they're also going to move more and more people to be on government-run health care, which, like the Oregon Health Plan, will pay for abortions with no copay. And then this House Bill 2009 set a goal that, well, actually, it brought into being that we now have a public option as well as an insurance exchange, and then it set off this group to say, well, go define what that is, determine how we're going to fund that, and then come back to us. So that's a place where we have some hope because they have to fund this thing. Yeah, and this is an update from August 2010. The state hired Bill Kramer, a healthcare consultant, to develop a business plan on how to fund a statewide public option. Kramer told the Oregon Health Policy Board that the future public health plan in Oregon wouldn't necessarily be a government-run delivery system such as the Veterans Administration. So in other words, that is one of the options, is this new health care that they're creating in Oregon will operate like the VA, which would mean that we would have a public option in Oregon that was completely government-run. And so, in conclusion on this section, given Kitzhaber's background and the drive of the groups behind government-run health care, it is probable they will continue to work to move the state from funding just 1/3, which is way too many, of the abortions in Oregon to funding all the abortions in Oregon. And towards that, take a look at these attitudes that are reflected in a March 2009 Oregonian article. If the state did not pay for abortions, low-income women on the Oregon Health Plan would not have the choice that more affluent women have, said Senator Alan Bates, Democrat Ashland, co-chair of the Ways and Means Subcommittee. So they view this as like a health care right, that abortion is a basic health care right. It has always been a covered service, Jim Edge, state Medicaid director, said. Oregonians voted to legalize abortions. And then finally, Narrow Pro-Choice of Oregon, a nonprofit group that supports choice, sees few threats to abortion services in Oregon. So they're comfortable, they're confident, and has turned its attentions to expanding medical coverage for prenatal care and increasing the availability of contraception, said their deputy director. So they're so confident of the way things are moving in Oregon, they're not even concerned about abortions being paid for. And one of the hopeful things for us is there is an Achilles heel to government-run health care, and that's the cost. When the government runs their own health care, it costs them roughly 26 cents on the dollar. That's about double what a private health insurance company costs. And then if you look, and this is even before Obamacare went in, the government health insurance already in place before Obamacare as a percentage, so it's comparing apples to apples, the U.S. spent more on government health care than either Canada or the U.K. And they're 100%, they're nationalized, and we were still spending more as a percentage. 46% of our national health care dollars go to government health care, but the government is so inefficient with these dollars, it only covers 27% of the people. So with 46% of the dollars, they only cover 27% of the people. Private health insurance with 35% of the dollars covers 68% of the people. And all this is just a way of showing that when the government tries to expand government-run health care, they are going to need a lot of dollars. And that's a place where we can have an influence and stop them from expanding government-run health care and the associated government-funded abortions. Yeah, so now to the surprising thing you can do to prevent an increase in the number of government-funded abortions. Make sure K through 12 schools get fully funded. What? We'll take a look. There actually is a very direct correlation, and it's something everybody in this room can do. So we're going to, and because most of us, the place where we have the most direct influence is the state of Oregon, I'm going to focus on Oregon. So the state budget in Oregon, there's three major parts to it. There's the general lottery funds, and when you read the Oregonian or you watch the newspapers, if they're talking about the state budget, that's the part of the budget they're talking about. And then we also have other funds and federal funds. And other funds are things like the investment income from PERS, tuition and fees paid to universities and colleges, hunting fees, license fees, and all that. So we won't talk about that today. And then federal funds, which is money that Oregonians send off to Washington, D.C., and some of that comes back and goes into different programs like highways and some other programs. Okay, so this is just a pie chart showing our state budget as if it were a pie. And number one here is the part of the budget we're going to talk about the most. That's the general lottery fund. And then there's number two is the other funds, which is about half our budget. And number three, the federal funds. So general lottery funds is about a quarter of the budget. And Oregon budgets on a 2-year basis or a biennium basis. So every 2 years now, our state spending is about $60 billion if you look at the whole budget, all funds. Take a quick look at the general lottery funds. So a lot of times when you listen to the news, you read the newspaper, it sounds like the state government's always hurting for money, always need more money. Well, this is a chart showing just general lottery fund spending starting in 1977, and this is the current budget. And you can see that it goes up and up and up. And if you just, well, that doesn't really match what I hear every year, but it's because they keep growing and then saying they need more, but they don't communicate that part. Excuse me. And then how many people in here remember last year Governor Kulongoski was talking about this decade of deficits? Do you remember that from the news? This is the decade of deficits. It's because they were projecting massive increases in spending. That's not what you or I would call a deficit. A deficit to me is, okay, I've got the same amount of money I had last year, I've got the same expenses as I had last year, but I can't afford those now. But they're talking about a massive increase in spending. And that was his decade of deficits, which was a very deceptive phrase. And this, they also talked about, well, we've got a budget shortfall. And I think it came to be about a $3.5 billion shortfall. Well, here's the current budget, there's the shortfall. I want that shortfall in my paycheck. I'm going to ask my boss on Monday for a shortfall like that. It's not a shortfall, it's an increase in spending. Okay, now this is looking at the all funds budget. And Senator Larry George, some people in here might know him, he's actually been after the media for a number of years to please report to Oregonians the whole budget picture. Don't just pretend that our budget is just the lottery and general fund. There's also all this other funds money and the federal money. Last year, the Oregonian showed this picture, which was very impressive. And it also shows the growth in the state budget. And it shows that in Oregon, our state government spending has doubled in 10 years. Which, again, doesn't match with what we hear day in and day out, but it has. Our state government spending has doubled in 10 years. And this little chart here is from the Oregonian. Now take a look at Governor Kitzhauer's budget. And he submitted his budget to the legislature on February 1st, and it's like a set of recommendations. And first we'll look at what he recommended for the general lottery fund. And he did a good thing. He didn't go the crazy amount that Governor Kulongoski's reset cabinet budget would have projected, which was up here. He came in about the same level. So his overall general lottery fund spending is pretty much on par with what we're doing this year, which that's a good thing he did. Well, and actually, for the all funds budget, he's actually projecting a little bit lower amount than our current budget. So, two good things. That's very good so far. Now we're going to take a little detour, and we're going to talk about one of the biggest uses of money in the state of Oregon. So most state money goes to this agency. It's the Department of Human Services. This is their headquarters in Salem. This is Darth Vader's cubicle. And this is a quote from Governor Kulongoski's Reset Cabinet report. If we remain on the path we're on, there will be further shifts in budget priorities toward human services and away from education. So what he's acknowledging there is that they've already been shifting money away from schools over to human services. And he's saying, going forward, there'll be more of that. And most of that money going over to human services is to build the infrastructure and then grow out government-run health care. Above and beyond Medicaid, which we already, a lot of states, they just have Medicaid, which is the federal health care for low-income folks. But Oregon already goes above and beyond that with several programs, including the Oregon Health, parts of the Oregon Health Plan. But what they introduced in House Bill 2009 goes way beyond that, and it's going to cost a fortune. And they've already started pilfering the schools to get money for that. And in fact, from Governor Kulongoski's own budget numbers, 2/3 of that growth, you remember that little shortfall growth? 2/3 of that was for human services. And here's an eye chart showing that. On a different projector, you could actually read it. And this is something I found out about a year or so ago. How many people in here remember Measure 66 and 67? Okay. It was for the kids, right? Okay. So, before Measure 66 and 67, the Democratic-controlled supermajority in the House and the Senate and the Democratic governor, they took $150 million from the K through 12 state school fund. $150 million. They grew, at the same time, they grew DHS by $330 million. So they had the money. Then they came to the voters and said, got to have some money for the kids. And the voters said, okay, here you go. They voted in Measure 66 and 67. Not a dime went back to the schools. So as a result, the schools took a real cut of $150 million in the K through 12 state school fund. School districts across the state felt the pain, had to cut their budgets. DHS grew by $330 million. And this is just looking at that general lottery funds, the part that the legislature has the most control over. And they didn't want to talk about it mostly, but when they had to talk about it, they said, well, Oregon, we're really having a tough time here with the high unemployment, the tough economy, and that's why DHS needed all that money. It was for unemployment and for food stamps. Okay, I suppose that makes sense. But then I looked into it. DHS doesn't handle unemployment benefits. That's a different agency. That's the employment department. And they actually got their budget cut. Okay, so was the $330 million just for food stamps? Well, the actual money for food stamps comes from the federal government, so it wouldn't come out of that general lottery fund budget. It's only a portion of the administration that comes from the general lottery funds. So where did the $330 million go? And I also looked into if you can find some of their more detailed budget stuff, which is fascinating reading, DHS has 6 different divisions. Every one of those 6 divisions grew. So they are doing a massive ramp up of DHS, and they're deceiving the voters of Oregon. They're telling them it's for the schools, but that's not where the money's going. Yeah, so they grew DHS in the last budget. Well, how much did they grow DHS? They grew DHS by 1,300 employees. At a time when they said, we're out of money, we got to have Measure 66 and 67, school districts were facing real cuts, they grew up by 1,300 employees. Well, I don't know, how many is 1,300? Does the state have 1 million workers, 50 workers, how many? 1,300 employees, this is how much they added to DHS in one budget. That's the size of the entire state police department. So our entire state police department has 1,300 employees, and that's troopers, dispatchers, game wardens, fire marshals, forensic scientists. 1,300 total. They grew DHS by 1,300 in one budget at a time when they said there was no money. I did get an update recently that the Department of State Police is down to 1,302 employees because this elk retired. He moved to Arizona, he got tired of the rain. And unfortunately, even though Governor Kitzhaber's budget does some good things, here's something it doesn't do. He's cutting the K through 12 state school fund by an additional $225 million over the previous budget. And he's growing DHS and their split off Oregon Health Authority by $333 million, almost the exact same amount they grew it last time. So in just 2 budgets, the K through 12 schools are getting cut $375 million, and DHS is growing $660 million. And this is just a chart showing over the last several budgets, comparing the DHS funding to the state, to the K through 12 school funding. And the red numbers are DHS, and the blue numbers are the schools, K through 12 schools. And the dark blue and the dark red, that's that all funds budget, which really only makes a difference for DHS, because DHS gets some money from federal government funding, they get some from other funding, and then they get general lottery dollars. K through 12 schools mostly only gets that general lottery fund. And you can see that DHS has a much bigger all funds budget than the K through 12 schools, but they used to be quite a bit lower than the general lottery fund, and over time they're getting closer and closer even in their general lottery fund. And that's reflective of what they've been doing these last few budgets. And you can see that the K through 12 school funding is going down a little bit, while DHS is taking off like a rocket. And most of that is to lay the groundwork and to start rolling out government-run healthcare expansion. And they're not being honest with the people of Oregon. Because it'd be one thing if they came and they said, we need Measure 66 and 67 because we want to grow government-run healthcare in Oregon. Do you want that? And then let the voters decide. But that's not what they said. They said it's for the kids, which was an out-and-out lie. And I'm just going to show you a couple different slices of the budget to try and give you some perspective on the budget. Well, first we'll look at the all funds budget, all the different pieces of the pie. So this is a chart looking at the top 10 agencies. There's actually like 50 to 60 different state agencies and boards in the Oregon budget. This is the top 10 dollar-wise, looking at the all funds budget. And number 1 is DHS by quite a bit. Number 2 is PERS, and number 3 is the state school fund. So when you look at all their sources of funding, DHS is just massive, almost $16 billion per budget. And then the Oregon University System, the Employment Department, Department of Transportation, Department of Administrative Services, Housing Community Services, Department of Education, Department of Corrections. And that's an interesting thing to me always when I see this. Department of Corrections is down here. Yeah, it's pretty small. I mean, I wouldn't mind having their money, but for the state, you know, it's like when they're looking to save $20, $30 million, which to the state is chump change, why do they release a few felons instead of looking for a tiny bit of savings here? It's very cynical. It's obviously to make people feel pain so they'll be more open to spending more on taxes. It's a very dishonest conversation with the people of Oregon. And this reminds me of like talking to one of my teenage daughters when they were teenagers. And, you know, they're at college and in the first year at college, and then they tell you that, well, you got to give me some more money or I won't be able to buy books. And, oh, all right. And you go down and look in their room, and they've got, you know, a new stereo, and they got the latest whatever iPod or iPad or whatever. And they got money for that, but they don't have money for school books. Yeah. Okay, and so this, I mentioned there's 50 or 60 state agencies and boards. So if we took that Department of Corrections and added in all the other state agencies and boards that were off to the right here and put them into one little box, that would be this. So DHS is bigger than that. It's bigger than those other 50 or 60 agencies plus corrections. It's just massive. And this isn't, there's actually nothing inherently wrong with DHS. They do some fantastic work. We had a situation in our neighborhood several years ago where there was a young girl who was not being treated very well at all at her home. We had to contact DHS, Child Services. They came out, and the woman who did, I would not want her job for anything, and she was amazing. Took great care of this girl in our neighborhood, got her the help she needed, and fantastic. And I think a lot of DHS work is like that. The problem is they're massive. They're just huge, and they're largely hidden from the public, and the size of their budget is largely hidden, and we don't have public discussions about the things that are going on there. And I don't think they're honest with the state, with the voters of Oregon about when they need more money. If it's for DHS, tell us that and make the case. Don't tell us it's for the kids. Okay, other funds. That's yeah, this is just a look at the all funds budget. Yeah, okay. One more way of looking at the size of DHS. So if DHS were a piece of this pie, how big would it be? And so this is the other funds budget, half the budget. That's this. DHS would be the second biggest piece of that pie. It's just massive. It's a huge, huge agency. And take one more look back at this 1/4 of the budget. Okay, so now this is looking at the same picture, only we're only now looking at this 1/4 of the budget, which is the general lottery fund. And in this picture, the K through 12 state school fund, that is the biggest item, because they don't get money from the federal government in the state budget, and they don't get money from the other funds. So they are the biggest. And then DHS, Department of Corrections, Oregon University System, Department of Community Colleges, Education, Judicial, and some other agencies. And when all of us in this room look at this picture, we see 10 blue sticks of butter. But if you're somebody in the legislature who wants to grow DHS and the Oregon Health Authority, the picture looks more like this. They see a big blue gas tank. All that money in the K through 12 state school fund, that's a gas tank for them to fuel up the Cadillac. Because that government-run healthcare takes a ton of money. And that's why they keep going to the state school fund, because it's the other parts of the budget are a lot harder to get at. But the state school fund, it's in the general lottery fund, so that's a lot easier for them to take. And that's what they've been doing. Exactly. All right, and this is another related discussion. So you guys understand the concept of a rainy day fund. So, and that is that during good times, you put away a little money. And then when times get tough, you reach into your rainy day fund and use that money. And the problem is, of course, we live in Oregon. So it rains all the time. And that's the way they've been using these rainy day funds. And I thought that really for Oregon, they need to rename this to be It's Warm Enough at the Coast to Swim in the Ocean Day Fund. Then we wouldn't use it very often, if ever. Okay, and so recently there's been talk in the news about, well, we need a rainy day fund. We got to have a rainy day fund. Well, we already have 2 rainy day funds. We have the Education Stability Fund, which was started in 2002, and then we have something called the Oregon Rainy Day Fund, which would give them a clue that we have a rainy day fund. And that was started in 2007. We'll take a look at that one. That was started when Jeff Merkley was still here, and he was the Speaker of the House, and they created a rainy day fund that was supposed to protect public schools against an unstable economy. But only 1 year after Merkley left, the Democratic supermajority in the last session raided that newly created cookie jar and completely drained it. And at the same time, that's when they took that $150 million from the schools and grew DHS by $330 million. So clearly, that rainy day fund was not for the schools. This is something else that bothers me. To build that rainy day fund, they kept the corporate kicker. So that's like you go to Costco and you buy something for $20. You buy a box of donuts for $20. They're really good donuts. And you give them a $100 bill, and they go, "Thank you." So I'm waiting for my change. Oh, we're keeping the kicker. Anybody else that did this would go to prison, but the legislature can do this. They stole this $320 million from corporations and to build this rainy day fund, and then within one session, they drained it out. And the 320 was just to start it. They put other monies in there as well. And I don't think this helps our unemployment when we treat employers this way. Yeah, and they said, well, we're going to put all these safeguards. We've got safeguards on this, so don't worry about it. And in the 2009 regular session and the 2010 special session, they tapped that new rainy day fund 3 times. And by the end of this session in June, which is when it runs out, it'll be down to $10 million. So they started it with 320, added more into it. It's going to be down to a paltry $10 million. And Cascade Policy Institute predicted this back in 2003. They said no matter what safeguards you put on a rainy day fund, it's not going to be safe. And they were right. You can't read this very well, but so this is from this week. They've introduced 2 bills this week to raid 2 of the rainy day funds again. I mean, this is just like, it reminds me of, you're trying to help out a troubled cousin, and you tell him, he's got a little bit of a drug problem. You say, now listen, I got to go away for the weekend. I'm going to leave a jar full of mad money, but I don't want you taking any of this money, okay? Yeah, no, I got it. And you go away, and you come back, and of course the jar's empty. And you go, what happened? There was an emergency. I had to buy some crack. And that's the way the legislature has treated this money. If any money we've put in the jar, they've taken. I was blown away with this because I was putting this together for this weekend, and I ran across this. I went, wow. I mean, they're not all the times they've already tapped these rainy day funds, they're going to try and tap them again.
Is it really going for schools and seniors? Who knows?
Well, I'll show you.
Okay.
The answer is no.
Well, why am I not surprised by that?
just like my daughter's money didn't go for school books.
Yeah.
Okay, so we already have this. We already have the Education Stability Fund. We already have the Oregon Rainy Day Fund. Well, now they're going to create, and the Oregon Rainy Day Fund is statutory, so it's in the law, but it's not in the Constitution. They're going to change it to be in the Constitution. They're going to start keeping half the they're going to start keeping half of our kicker to put into that rainy day fund.
Oh, right. Don't they have to give voters approval?
Right, yes, absolutely.
Hello.
And then they're going to create this Oregon University Stability Fund, and they're going to keep all the corporate kicker going forward for that. And all of this, they're combined, when they talk about it in the news, they're calling this, we need a robust rainy day fund. So just having the Oregon Rainy Day Fund wasn't enough. They need a robust rainy day fund. So I'm guessing that this one from a couple years ago was the Rainy Day Fund Light. So here's the problem with the rainy day funds. There's the Education Stability Fund that they created in 2002, and supposedly that money can only go to the K through 12 funds. And the Oregon Rainy Day Fund from 2007, that can go anywhere in the budget. And this new one, this Oregon University Stability Fund, can only go to universities and community colleges. But here's the problem. They got these pipes here. So what they'll do is, at the start of the budget, they'll say, well, let's cut the K through 12 budget, which if you look at the last 2 budgets, they've cut it by a total of $375 million. And then they grow DHS by $660 million. And then they come back and they go, oh, K through 12 doesn't have enough money. We need to tap the rainy day fund. Well, you wouldn't have to tap the rainy day fund if you didn't take the money from here and put it over here. And it's kind of like you're standing in, I think about this, you carefully measure the water in a pool so that it's at least 5 feet deep, because your doctor said you could break your neck if it's not at least 5 feet. And don't actually try this, I'm not sure about the 5 feet, I'm just saying that. But suppose it is 5 feet, and you just get ready to dive off the board and you look up and there's people at the other end of the pool with big buckets dumping it out. What are you doing? If it goes below 5 feet, I'll break my neck. Oh, don't worry, we're just taking it out of this end of the pool. I don't think it works like that. And we have the same problem with the state budget. When they take it from here to put it into here, and they say, that's why when they dedicate these rainy day funds to a specific purpose, it's meaningless. You can only put the water in this end of the pool. So what we need is a plug. Awesome. And for that plug, what they need to do is they need to create a separate fund or a separate part of the budget where things like K through 12 education, state police, corrections, and a very, very narrowly defined set of human resources for the most vulnerable populations, they get funded from, when income taxes come in, they get funded first, and they get funded whatever they were at the last year plus a little cost of living. And that's, nobody can touch that. You can't drain that money. It's in its own vault. Anything else that comes in gets thrown into the trough, and all these different agencies can fight at the trough for that money's, making their case to the voters of Oregon, making their case to the legislature. And actually, this idea was proposed. It's not a new idea. This idea was proposed in the last session. They called it the Back to Basics budget. It would not have cut K through 12 at all, but it was rejected. And Governor Kulongoski's Reset Cabinet report talked about we have to identify what are the core responsibilities of government. And so where that all ties back into abortions is, if we make the legislature fully fund K through 12 schools, don't let them use it as that big blue gas tank, they won't be able to drive the Cadillac. They won't be able to expand government-run health care. They won't be able to offer abortion to more people paid for with no copay using our tax dollars. And it will get broad-based support across the state because nobody likes to see schools closing, teachers getting laid off, librarians getting laid off, and we're just making them use the money the way they're telling us they're using it. And that's it, and I think I may have one or a couple questions. A public option basically is the state government is licensed to operate as a health insurance company.
So public is referring to public agents,
Right.
not me.
No, and it's kind of like, you go to a Duck Beaver game and you wait for the referees to come on the field and they're either wearing Duck uniforms or Beaver uniforms. And I don't think this is going to be a fair game. That's just one of the problems.
Yeah, no business.
But and I think the way to do that actually is by exposing what they're doing to the schools.
Right.
Because when the voters of Oregon realize that they've been deceived, that the reason that their schools being closed, that their favorite teachers being laid off is because they've been misled, I believe that they will start electing different people to serve them in Salem.
That would be the issue.
What can we do?
So, okay, what everybody in here can do is when you talk to your school board, when you talk to your state representative, when you talk to your state senator, hold their feet to the fire. Don't let them cut the K through 12 state school budget. No matter what they tell you, don't let them cut it. There is the money. They're just giving it somewhere else. I'm actually working with one state senator who may introduce a bill to do that.
So we should just.
But one of the things that helps a lot is even if you just send an email or just have a conversation with your school board, because I worked a little bit with the Beaverton School Board, and I don't know about other school boards, they all have their different things, but I could see these folks are afraid of their legislators. They're afraid that if they make them mad, that they'll punish them. And unfortunately, in the world of politics, that's a very real thing.
You're talking about the school board.
Yes, but put pressure on your school board, put pressure on because they have a lot of influence on the legislature. But that's why if you put pressure on them, they are spineless. But if you put pressure on them, you can, then they have to deal with, pressure from both sides. But if you put enough pressure, we can start pushing things the other way, and it does work. We're seeing a little bit of movement, but also any email, letters to the editor, when you feel moved to do that, letters to your representative, letters to your senator, don't accept any cuts. And if they say, well, we're going to close the school, no. You go back to the legislature and tell them to fully fund this.
So you don't see the administration as having the ability to stand up?
Oh, I just think school boards, my personal observation is school boards have more clout with the legislature.
Sort of. I mean, just because they're citizens, not.
Well, but also when they go to run for again, they want their endorsement.
That's true.
And also, if a school board member complains about the legislature, that gets a lot more press than